All right, our next panel is talking about Business 4.0, how to excel in execution. I'm going to very quickly get the panel and the moderator on stage. May I please invite Mr. Yusuf Hussain, who's the CEO Ignite at the National Technology Fund. Yusuf Saab, on stage. And Yusuf Saab has a lot of things planned. May I request Mr. Hamid van Struve, who's the Managing Director of Siemens Pakistan Engineering Company Limited, to be on stage. May I request Mr. Nasir, who's the CEO of Inbox Business Technologies, to join me on stage. So the seating will be as I announce it. So Mr. Hamid van Struve, then Nasir, then Maheen Rahman, who's the CEO of Alfalah Investments. And you can please give her a big round of applause. Then we will have Khurram Hamid, who's the Chief Digital Officer, Zypher for APAC. Hello. And last but not least, Mr. Nadeem Elahi, who's the Managing Director and Country Manager, Pakistan for TRG. Thank you. And Yusuf Saab?
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay. So I think, first of all, I think thanks, I want to express gratitude to the organizers. I think a great information-packed day. I think a number of themes were discussed, and I think one of the themes was change. Change comes in the form of innovation, new inventions impacting society. We looked at the first industrial wave, which was steam engine, second electricity, and I think we are lucky to have one of the architects of the second industrial wave, which was created by electricity and assembly lines, which is Siemens, and we have their country head here in the form of Hamid. So Hamid, talk to us about the fourth industrial wave, but also all day we have heard about how fourth industrial wave transformation, AI big data is transforming telecom. Irfan Wahab talked about that. We heard Sharjeel from UBL talking about the potential of transformation in banking and blockchain. But now moving beyond potential and coming on the ground, can you give us an example in manufacturing of what fourth industrial wave can do and lessons for manufacturers in Pakistan, please?
Yeah, thank you very much again, and also thank you for having me here today. What I think as an example here for manufacturing is a car brand that is quite passionate, but a lot of people are quite passionate about it. It's Maserati. It's an Italian car brand. It's an Italian manufacturer of sporting vehicles, and they were looking at designing and bringing out a complete new car model, which is the so-called the Ghibli. It's a smaller four-door version compared to the Quattroporte, which is a bigger one, and it's not a sports car like the Tourism GT or whatever. So they were looking at bringing this new model out into the market, and they were working with Siemens. And what we did was we started the whole process from the design of the car by developing a virtual twin. So in parallel to the actual development of the car itself, we developed a virtual twin where you could significantly reduce the amount of time that is needed to bring the model to the production center. We also were working with them on the engineering side in order to make sure that they can harmonize the engineering processes, bring together all different manufacturers from the various spaces, suppliers, together with the so-called software that is called Team Center. We were developing the whole manufacturing process because they wanted to bring the model of the Ghibli into the same production line than they had for the Quattroporte. So that required quite a sophisticated look at how you slot in a totally different model with all these various customized options into a production facility that is running. And you don't want to disrupt the production for your vehicles that are being produced. So we also simulated this and created a virtual environment to see how it actually works. And then actually then also later on develop the manufacturing, monitoring the manufacturing that happens, and then being able to twist and tweak certain production stages in order to optimize. And that led to a reduction of speed of 30% of bringing it to market. It increased the production numbers significantly by retaining the let's say, this individual and the manufacturing component of a small car developer, not like VW or others, but like a Maserati is supposed to be done.
Very good, excellent. So in other words, Pakistan today is faced with a situation where we are experiencing premature kind of deindustrialization and movement to services. Much of our manufacturing is getting eviscerated, exports are going down, and so you feel something like this, what we may call Industry 4.0 with sensors for manufacturing, IoT sensors, big data, AI, augmented reality for predictive maintenance, or for the kind of simulation you talked about. This is something which could help our manufacturing and industry become more competitive globally?
Correct, correct. And it also helps you to produce the quality that you need. It reduces the downtime, and it also helps you to overcome some of the hurdles that you have on the supply chain side. We talk about additive manufacturing, 3D printing. This is a complete new step of manufacturing, and it would also help then to set up manufacturing facilities in areas that you have not been developing in the past, with high quality, high complex structures, with minimum struggle to fulfill your supply chain, because you actually need powder or steel basics that can be easily brought in the country and then utilized.
Excellent. So from an example of how we can increase our manufacturing competitiveness, let's next move to an example of how this kind of new technology and digital transformation has delivered results on the ground. Earlier today, Irfan Wahab alluded to how 6 million farmers across the country have increased their income by an average of 15% through getting agricultural information. We are lucky to have CEO of Inbox who actually implemented the system. So can you tell us a little more, Nasir, about how this kind of transformation, how did it work, and how can it be utilized for other services, perhaps government services?
Yeah, so thank you, Yusuf. So basically what Irfan was referring to was connecting the farmers. The whole concept is digital inclusion, that farmers cannot look at an increase in the yield if they do not have access to the right kind of information. And in this day and age, the right access to information has to be on a digital platform. Thank God for mobile broadband being so prevalent and broadband packages being so cheap. Most of our farmers can now afford phones. So what we did was actually, the government gave out phones, and we built purpose-built applications and purpose-built advisory services on that platform. And as a result, over the last 6, 8, 10 months, what you're actually seeing is that the farmers are now interacting with members of the government and agri experts and extension workers to understand, and vice versa, for the government to understand what their problems are. So if the yield is going down, why is it going down? Is it a particular pesticide issue? Is it any other issue? Is it fertilizer? And that can be now solved in real time. And on top of that, microinsurance, microcredit is all going through a digital platform. So it was amazing that you see that we feel, or we take for granted, that farmers in our country that have been farming for all their lives would know more about it than anybody else. But on those platforms, when you reach out to them regarding basic techniques for farming and all, we see that data coming out. And when we talk about the industrial revolution, 4.0, we're actually using data science and artificial intelligence to mine that data to try and understand what will be the predictive analytics for a cotton crop in a particular area at a particular time going forward into the future. So it's really helped in what for the farming community. And the whole concept now on the government side that we're working with is that when you talk about bottom of the pyramid, right? The growth is actually from the bottom of the pyramid. For all the enterprises and the corporations sitting here, the growth is actually going to be from bottom of the pyramid. How do you reach out to the bottom of the pyramid? It cannot be done without digital inclusion, right? It cannot be done without data. And the government is realizing that. The government realizes that in order to provide the accurate citizen services that it needs, it has to digitize its interaction with the customers. And to digitize this interaction, it has to bring data onto these platforms. It has to consolidate its data. For example, when you're talking about taxes, or you're talking about tax evasion, or you're talking about increasing your tax net, without data-driven decision making, this is not possible. Without artificial intelligence and mining the data that you have from different subsets, trying to understand where the tax evasion is taking place and what areas is taking place is not possible. So this is some of the things that's actually happening in the country today. And we're very lucky to be part of it, actually.
Thank you very much. I personally find it amazing that just because of mobile broadband and mobile phones, just by getting the right information to farmers, there's been a 15% increase in their income. I think that's just tremendous. And now, like Nasir is saying, with AI and big data, we can take it to the next level and really increase productivity. But to enable this, to enable the kind of factory or industry 4.0 that Helmut talked about, or this kind of nationwide information services, or later on AI big data analysis for insurance and loans and so on, to enable all that, we need a connected platform. We need connection. We need data talking to each other. Maheen, as the CEO of Alfalah Investments, you have to be skeptical of these oftentimes hypes, and you have to ask some searching questions. So how convinced are you?
Well, I think as a financial institution, I think we are caught bang in the middle of the old way of doing things and the new way of doing things. And you would think that as financial institutions, we would have a direct advantage, perhaps, of being in the fintech space, of being early adopters of that. But I think what you have to recognize is the actual inherent limitations of our current financial system. And there you have, I think, almost every bank, and I'm sure you would have heard about them for the course of the day. Every bank has a digital officer. Every bank has a digital department. Every bank has a data collection department. But how is that actually filtering through into the actual operations of that institution? So for me, for example, we do all the requisites. We have mobile applications, we have online connectivity, we have internet banking. But when you actually try and connect one bank to another bank to a third bank, you will run into so many bottlenecks along the way in terms of just making the connectivity absolutely seamless. And that's really where the problem lies. So this is not like you take one particular industry and you digitize that, or you bring AI into that. This is about a collective financial system of a country, which I think needs an overhaul pull into the new age, frankly speaking. So I think there's going to be need much more work in terms of the financial regulatory environment, in terms of the banks themselves, and in terms of the entire chain of financial services.
Okay. So to attain this, at least in banking, regulatory-wise, culture-wise, a lot has to be done. It's not enough to appoint a chief innovation officer or a chief digital officer. They have to have the mandate and power to bring in change. Thank you. And so next, you've heard Khurram, share what he's done with Pfizer before. But here, Khurram, we'd like to know specifically that in terms of transformation, and just to explain, the way I'm looking at it is that we talked about innovation and change. It can be of two types. One can be disruption, like Expedia and or Travelocity disrupted existing travel agents, or like Facebook and WhatsApp are disrupting newspapers. They are putting them out of business. They have become like sunset industries. So that is disruption by an external force or startup. And the second is a corporate transforming itself to remain nimble and survive, so it doesn't go out of business. So when we talk about transformation, can you tell us what were your lessons learned, do's and don'ts from your experiences in UAE with their digital health initiative? What are lessons learned for Pakistan?
I think what we've been doing, what has Pfizer been doing with the UAE Prime Minister's office is basically working with them on, because healthcare is a very regulated industry, just like financial services. So when you want to do innovation, it's very difficult because the regulation doesn't allow you to do that. So one of the key things about regulation is that Pfizer cannot talk directly to customers, patients, or have access to patient health data. So the UAE had a specific problem, which was they wanted to bring down cardiovascular death by 20%. So what we did was we worked with them on something called a regulatory hack, which was to actually take a use case of government hospitals where we would have access to patient information, and we would essentially use AI technology to understand how those patients were performing on drugs, how they were adhering to the actual medication, and we could have only done that if we were working with the regulator in a safe regulatory sandbox in order to actually execute that, right? So if I look at that as a model, that's an easily replicatable model to bring to Pakistan for healthcare, or even doing it in other industries, because that's the only way that you're going to be able to drive a strategy. So you can have a chief digital officer, or chief innovation officer, highly regulated banking, highly regulated healthcare, and actually when you want to start doing stuff, you actually hit a brick wall because the regulation doesn't allow you to do it. So hence, taking that from the UAE government, this is a very successful way of how we've managed to work with the regulator on specific executable use cases that we've actually, we're getting the results of right now.
Thank you. I think TRG, Nadeem Elahi is the country director of TRG. I think it's one of the most exciting companies anywhere, because it's not only digitally transformed companies in the US by bringing the back offices to Pakistan, but is also now associated with Affinity, which is already a $1.6 billion company, artificial intelligence company. So Nadeem, tell us how you and Zia Chishti accomplished all this.
So I think ours is an interesting story. I think you know, the worst feeling you have when you realize that your own business is one day going to get completely disrupted, right? And fortunately, we had this realization much before McKinsey came up with a report last year where they said that in the Western world, or in the developed world, more than 2 million jobs for people doing basic manual services would actually get eliminated, right? We realized it sometime before the report came. So I think we are in the customer service industry, right? We do business process outsourcing. So we take business processes that have voice or non-voice components attached to them, and we service those from different parts of the world depending on what the cost is, right? And if you think about it, the customer service industry, you know, even though it's IT enabled, you use IT to take data and voice across, thousands of miles across the world. You can process it in another part of the world and send it back. It's still very archaic, and I'll give you an example, right? The paradigm of customer service primarily works around first come, first serve, right? So if you think about it, it's totally random, right? What it does, it takes the longest waiting customer, whether you're in a bank or you're in a call center, wherever you are, takes the longest waiting customer and matches him up with the first available agent. Now, if you put some mind to it, I mean, what is it? It's totally random. It's like me talking to a total stranger who has no clue about, or no empathy, no clue, nothing. So we realized that there must be a better way to actually do customer service, and if we were going to get disrupted, then it was better for us to come up with the technology to sort of transform and take this industry to the next stage. So we came up with a product which is AI-based. AI, as you know, is self-learning software. I mean, the buzzword is AI, but at the end of the day, what it does is it's software that self-learns, right? So with every interaction, it gets better and better, and that's why people consider it so, because the human brain or human mind cannot actually catch up, with the self-learning that happens. So we came up with Affinity. What Affinity does is, instead of that random match, right, first available agent, longest waiting customer, it actually uses data to create that match, right? And that could be demographic data. It could be data on the service agent themselves, or data on the customers. For example, if you're a credit card customer and you call a bank, the bank already knows, from your phone number or from the minute you punch in your information, it already knows who you are. It knows, how much you spent. It knows whether you have a credit line or not. It knows, whether you're a big spender or a big borrower. All of those things, right? At the same time, the bank knows its employees. So the person that is being called into, or the person servicing it, they also know that. Was he the best, sales performer? Is he the best quality person? I mean, you have all those traits. So rather than creating a random match, why don't we use data to create that match? And that's what we did. And we, through tests, have proven that you can, in any given day, improve whatever metric you take, right? Whether it's service or sales or quality or you name it, anywhere between 5 to 7%. And imagine the impact it does. I mean, just to give you an example, sales through centers or through contact centers in particular is over $1 trillion. I mean, $1 trillion of product is being sold or serviced through contact centers. Imagine if we can improve that by 5 to 7%, what the improvement is. So that's the first step, and that's what we are doing right now. But as the technology evolves, there will be more iterations, and there will be points where you could basically reduce the human involvement portion to a minimum. But that's what Affinity is. And with only if you look at our total revenues, we're about a $400 million group, and Affinity is only a quarter of it. But the valuation that it has is about 10 times the rest of the business. So that shows that where the value really lies. Thank you.
So, that's how innovation happens. Somebody looked at this little thing. Can we match the right incoming call with the right customer service rep who's dealt with this customer before? And solving that little problem takes 4% of the bottom line expense, and it becomes a $1.6 billion company. That's how this innovation happens. But in a large organization, and somebody had put up that slide of a person with square wheels being told, buy these round wheels, and he's saying, I don't have time. And it was a cartoon, but that's a reality. When you're running a company, you're sucked into operations, you're focused on operations. Culture means being risk averse, managing risk. Strategy means executing well. But for innovation, you need more risk taking, you need more agility, experimenting, learning. There are two different kind of cultures. So Maheen, is it, it's easy to say that yes, chief digital officers, chief information officers, but they're not empowered. But how does an operational company or corporation manage these two kind of different boats, feet in two different boats at the same time?
I think the ultimate thing is HR and buy-in from your HR. I think without cultural change across the entire organization, you can have the best system, but if no one buys into it and your employees don't adopt it willingly and with excitement, I think it is going to be doomed for failure. So any kind of change transformation you want to bring on this side has to have buy-in of your senior management, all your layers below, and then all the workhorse layers below as well. Because I think without that, you will find consistent resistance to that change that's coming through. And also, I think one thing you have to keep in mind, which is what the previous speaker also highlighted, is that you're going to lose jobs in the process. There are going to be skills that are going to become irrelevant, and you're going to have to manage that change in the organization. So the more you train, the more you build that acceptance, and then the easier it is to actually roll out the plan with fewer hitches.
Okay. Now, Hamid, not only does Siemens, which was actually formed in 1847, right, like 100 years before Pakistan was created. So not only does Siemens have a, I think, great history of manufacturing and energy and medical equipment, but you've also recently acquired Mentor Graphics, Bentley, Mindsphere, and you're moving into the space of enterprise software and transformation. What is your take? How do you manage two different cultures in one large corporation?
It's a challenge, but on the other hand, I think it's key to the survival in the future. We see a number of trends coming. Is it urbanization, globalization, climate change? But one is also digitalization. And we see also the potential that comes through it. We see growth rates in the electrification area of 1 to 2% per year. Automation that grows faster, 3 to 4%, but digitalization is more than 8%. So what we have been doing, on the one side, we have invested heavily in training our existing workforce to make them understand what is digitalization all about. We spend more than 5 billion euros annually on research and development to invent in a number of areas, and one of the key parts is digitalization. We have been, for example, if you look at the power plant, if there's a new operator coming in, we have developed a helmet which is actually with a visor, and if a person goes through the power plant and looks at certain areas of the power plant, it displays valve settings, which actually he can control. Is this the proper setting? Is it not the proper setting? He can communicate with the people in the control center to see whether this is a spare part that needs to be exchanged, whether the reading is correct, or whether this pipe is actually the right pipe or not. So also that shows what digitalization can help do in order to help the actual team member to perform his work. Optimizing your internal administrational areas, reducing the paperwork, reducing the approval processes by digitalizing them. These are things that we have also done here in Pakistan in order to get rid of the lengthy process that sometimes take place. Again, also to showcase what can be done in order to make life easier on a day-to-day basis.
Okay, thank you. Now, Nasir, we were having a discussion earlier that in the Pakistani environment, I mean, every individual or a group or a company has a certain amount of energy and a certain amount of time in the day. To focus on innovation and become competitive, you need certain energy and effort. Is in the Pakistani environment, too much effort being sucked into things of ease of doing business or the difficulty of doing business, of regulation, of different tax agencies, and all these other things? Are they sucking away too much energy from individuals and companies? And B, at the other extreme, is there a certain level of protection, be that the ability to buy government bonds, be that other kind of tariff protection, which is kind of lulling corporations into not experimenting and innovating?
Yeah, so to answer your first question, yes, absolutely. I think we've been a victim of traditional firefighting in our daily organizational work simply because of the ecosystem that we function in. And there are a lot of bottlenecks, there are a lot of hurdles that we have to get over. So yes, ease of doing business, peace of mind of doing business when it comes to the other regulatory stuff, we're not there yet. I think we have far long way to go to improve that condition. So that sucks up a lot of the time. And especially when the top tier of the organization gets involved in these matters, then the real brain drain takes place, right? That's one. The other question you asked was the fact that is there maybe, I think what you're trying to say is there complacency in businesses. I think to a great extent there is. I think if you look at Pakistan and if you look at our various sectors, whether it was it's banking or textile or I mean there is competitiveness, but I think if you rate it at a global level, it's not there yet, and there is a level of complacency, and I think that is the level of complacency that is probably the single biggest driver why innovation or the urgency of innovation doesn't exist that much. Because innovation or the urgency or disruption or digitization, whatever you want to call it, it starts right at the top, not a layer below CEO, right? If the CEO has to be convinced, he has to have the buy-in, he has to champion it. If he's complacent, involved in firefighting, so digitization cannot be something that down the line the team or managerial levels are doing. It'll never work, right? So of course, there is complacency mixed with a lot of hurdles that we do, and I think complacency I can't comment on, but definitely ease of doing business has to be improved for sure.
Okay, so in other words, we need ease of doing business, like Ehsan talked about earlier, about innovation and science policy. Maheen talked about HR. We need better policy, we need ease of doing business, and then we need the pressure, market pressure, to become more innovative. Now, the other way of becoming innovative, in fact, over the last 30, 40 years, the main way of becoming innovative, the main organizational structure is a startup. That's why the 5 most valuable companies in the world are all startups, and Chinese companies are joining them, and Indian companies are trying to join them. We know their names, whether that's Alibaba or Flipkart or Facebook, Google. So startups, and that's why even large corporations, be that a Siemens, Cisco, IBM, even Facebook, they acquire startups like Facebook acquired WhatsApp, for example, or Oculus all the time, because they cannot match the level of innovation. So with respect to startups and the startup scene, Maheen, what are your thoughts about that? What is the startup scene in Pakistan? And, what are your general thoughts about that?
I think the reality has to be understood a little bit in Pakistan. And I think it's one thing to talk about Siemens doing something. It's one thing to talk about Telenor doing something, because these are the giants in the industry. These are the ones we expect to do something. It's completely different when you have a startup organization that is trying to find a new idea, that's trying to break a new market, and it's trying to do that on very little capital. And I think the fundamental issue in Pakistan is that our capital markets here, our ability to fundraise here, or to find money just to seed projects here is very, very limited. You have corporations, you have the large corporations in the country who like to incubate. They want to have a startup culture. They want to give birth to new companies. But that is, for me, not even the tip of the iceberg. I mean, for a country like Pakistan, those kind of setups probably will cover about 5 million people at best. Well, what about all the rest? Right, you have graduates of about 3 million people a year are graduating. You're going to need jobs for those 3 million people a year, which means that the entire ecosystem on financing startups has to really change. And that needs to come from the formal space, it needs to come from the regulatory space. And I think slowly that realization has really crept in, both at the regulatory framework, in the banking space, in the asset management space, that VC is important, that early stage angel investing is important. And I think that needs to stem out into all corporations to understand that if you don't look at this space now, eventually someone from here is going to come and disrupt your business, because I think that's inevitable.
Okay, so what is the floor on a deal for Alfalah to invest in?
On the VC side, we don't do, but we do have a PE fund on the Alfalah.
Yeah, so hopefully you'll soon start a VC fund and invest in startups and lead from the front. Nadeem, Affinity got funding in the US. How could the Pakistani entrepreneurial environment, because insofar as corporates go, there are corporates who are setting up venture capital funds, there are corporates who are setting up incubators, trying out startups to acquire or whatever. There are corporates who have business relationships, and of course acquisition goes on. But from the perspective of a startup, what are one or two things that you would like Pakistan to offer startups? Let's say early on in Affinity's life cycle, if that had existed in Pakistan, you would not have gone to the US for funding.
I think, and Maheen made some of those points earlier, I think there is a big lack. So we did, we have some experience with startups as well. When nobody was funding, a few of our tech folks got together and we put $1 million together to start a seed fund. And we incubated about 10 companies, out of which 2 survived and are now require that larger injection of capital, $3 to $5 million, but it's not there. So I think it goes back to the point of having that corporate VC culture, and it has to start. Unfortunately, you won't have what I disagree with Maheen a little bit is you won't have it from the outside, because the Pakistani investor is the best equipped to take care of the Pakistani sovereign risk. I mean, you will not have funds from outside coming in when when you don't have any local means and ways of funding. The banks are not the right folks to fund. The large corporations who have pools of capital are very used to putting pools of capital to work in the power sector or in rent-seeking sectors where the returns are guaranteed. So when you can get an ROE of 25% on a power plant, why the hell are you going to go and invest in a startup and wait for 7 years to see your money come back to you, right? So I think on our part, we looked at this whole sector. Similarly, what we did with IT services, we looked at software and engineering across the board, and we picked 3 or 4 companies which we thought would do well in customer service, and we've been working with them and funding them around. But I think the scale is missing, right? So I'm not sure how this will happen. I think I agree with her with Maheen that at some point somebody will say ye galat hai, isko theek karna hai, but I mean in Pakistan is like who's going to be that person to do it?
Thank you.
Thanks.
So CEOs should not have to worry about this firefighting operational issues at least. And number 2, we need that Series A, let's say $1 million or so. Khurram, can you tell us what are one lesson or 2 lessons we can learn from UAE? Because we hear a lot about what UAE is doing in terms of these 2 things.
I'm going to maybe answer it in a different way,
Oh.
if that's okay. So, for a large corporation like Pfizer, so what's happening at Pfizer is the pipeline of drugs is drying up, right? Digital healthcare as a market is about a $250 billion market. Just apps and wearables and all of this, which is impacting our core business. So the idea is, how do we start moving into that and grow into that space? And one of those ways that you do that is you have to actually tap into the startup community to understand what is the innovation that's actually happening on the ground and invest in that and maybe try those startups and then bring them into the organization through investment. So that's basically the roadmap that you do. Pakistan is not on anyone's roadmap, right? It's not. I mean, if you want to go and work with a startup or you want to do anything innovative, if you're a large corporation like a Pfizer, you will not come to Pakistan. And the only reason that I want to do something in Pakistan is because I'm a Pakistani and I'm the chief digital officer of Pfizer, and that's it. There's no other reason of why Pfizer will do anything here. It's because of overseas Pakistanis that are sitting in corporations that have mandates to do this, but they need to be welcomed. And the great thing with you, Yusuf, is that if we can get things right, then what we have done in the UAE with the government in setting up a digital healthcare accelerator, I want to do the same thing with Ignite, right? And that's because it's a selfish region, and that has worked in India, right? Because what has made India's IT and innovation and digital stuff so successful is they were able to attract Indians working outside of India who had the mandates in large corporations to say, we need to invest in India, because they had this thing in their heart saying, we want to do something. So I think that's really, really key, is how do you tap into the overseas Pakistanis that have mandates in innovation and all of this to actually pivot their organizations to come and invest in Pakistan.
Okay, thank you. And I just wanted to interject a note here that Ignite runs these 5 incubators and funds 5 or 6 startups, and some of them are doing really well in terms of preserving agriculture water or saving 90% of electricity theft or providing clean drinking water at about 1,000 the price. And the one company, we deal with a lot of corporates, but the one company which put in a couple of months of effort to go through all our startups, identify the ones they're interested in, and look at next steps is Siemens. So I would like to thank Siemens for that. Siemens is kind of leading the way. And now, but this is not just Pakistan. Is it true, Helmut, that you have a €1 billion fund globally, and due to which you're looking at some of these Pakistani companies as if they meet their claims, you will integrate them into your global product line?
Yeah, you mentioned it before. It's Siemens was founded in 1847, so we call this group or this team Next 47. And this Next 47 is funded with a €1 billion over 5 years term, identifying those companies that are actually working along the lines of innovation towards digital, off-grid digitalization, artificial intelligence, autonomous driving, e-aircraft. We are developing an electric-driven aircraft and those type of things. And we look at across the globe. We do hackathons all over the place in order to identify those startups that could add then the value to our core business, as if I can say so.
Thank you. And just for everybody, I want to give you 2 examples. One, there's a company out of Peshawar that we funded called Electrocure. And Electrocure uses artificial intelligence and Internet of Things to save 90% of electricity theft and transmission loss. And they've done this for 1 year in operation. And they now have an offer from a Chinese company for investment as well to take it nationwide. And that is one of the companies which Siemens is looking at. Which is really a global company, and it could add to the global product stream of Siemens. So this is what is possible from this country, and I would like a round of applause and thanks for Helmut. Blazing a path that others can follow. And by the way, the other company have people heard of Park Vitae? Park Vitae. Park Vitae. Other than the 2 we know well. So Park Vitae came out of NIC Lahore, our incubator in Lahore. Park Vitae built a nanotech filter through which you can even drink gutter water. In fact, I did. But it's so cheap that the poorest people, 100 million of our countrymen don't have access to clean drinking water, due to which we have the worst malnutrition and infant mortality in the world. This thing is so cheap that the poorest can afford it. Not only that, they've now raised $22 million from a private sector investor. They're setting up a world-class R&D center for polymer research in Karachi. And by 2020, 1 million families will have clean drinking water for the first time in their lives. And Kamidi Ando-san, CPG fellow group member, like Asan says CPGN, he has actually, just like Helmut and Stuart did for Electrocure, they are doing the same thing for Park Vitae. And I really hope that all the other corporate leaders look at this example and invest in Pakistani innovation and Pakistani companies as well. I really hope that. The next thing is that Maheen and Nadeem talked about, and Khurram alluded to, funding and how other countries are doing it and what needs to be done in Pakistan perhaps. I would like to ask Nasir. Nasir, what is the importance of crowdfunding in Pakistan? The Securities and Exchange Commission recently set up a committee, crowdfunding like Kickstarter, so that, again, like we crowdsource intelligence, we crowdsource funding. And number two, a small cap trading board on Pakistan Stock Exchange as a way to fund startups in this Series A, these two things.
I think it's a good idea to begin with, having the mechanism or the platform in place to be able to support startups, because I think that's a major thing that's missing in the ecosystem of the puzzle today. There are a lot of great ideas. You've given us 2 examples, but there are probably 12 others that might be decent enough, but probably don't get access to fund. So it's good you set up a crowdfunding. I'm not too well versed with the contours of this funding, but I think it's we'll have to understand that who the crowd is, right? Are we looking at crowd domestically, internationally? Like I think Pfizer, you were mentioning that interest coming into Pakistan from abroad is limited, so we're looking at primarily domestic crowdfunding. I think for domestic crowdfunding, it might be limited to a few good ideas, but if you're looking at crowdfunding for startups on a larger scale, we probably need a more systematic role in place from a VCs and a private equity fund. The good thing stock market did that I think they came out a parallel trading for SMEs or startups that they could trade. That's another thing. They should be allowed to go public at a much lower equity cap, so that people can equally trade and trade in equity and then raise funding publicly. They should be able to raise those fundings as well. So I think that's something in addition to the crowdfunding that they should look at.
Okay, thank you.